The 100% Wild podcast is brought to you by OnX Hunt, the nation's #1 GPS hunting app. Download today in the Google Play and App Store. All right, welcome back to another edition of the Drury Outdoors 100% Wild broadcast brought to you by OnX Hunt. I am Matt Drury, and I have a special co-host today, Mark Drury. Tim Chelsvik is out with a sick kid at home. We said, hey,
I need to stay away from this microphone. Yeah.
So we got Mark in, and we got a special guest with us today, too.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this one, and if there was a convenient time for Tim to miss a podcast, this is it, because this is really the guest that I love talking to annually throughout the year, and it's especially an honor today to be here with our guest.
Absolutely. We hate when we have to talk to him from a regard of, you know what, we probably messed up a little bit, but without further ado, we have Tracker John Engelken. What's up, Tracker John?
Hey there, Matt. Hi, Mark. Good to see you guys. We're doing well. Glad to be here.
Very good. Well, so to kind of give a little bit of a backstory of our history together, you know, of course, those of you that may be in DeerCast probably have been seeing Tracker John in the elite version in DeerCast Track, but our relationship dates way back, further than that. Mark, when did you and Tracker John first meet each other?
You know, I think I first learned of Tracker John through Joe Gizdick, if I'm not mistaken. Joe told me about Tracker John and his capabilities. This is back at the same time that I met Tom Ware, so that would go back maybe 15 years, John? 13?
Yeah,
15?
I'm going to say probably 2006.
Yeah, so 14 years ago or so. And since then, we've enjoyed many conversations, many fun times together, and some incredible tracking experience. I mean, he has taught me so much, not only about how to track with his incredible dogs, but also, as I observe them, I learn a little bit about what deer are doing with their sense of smell. So he's taught me a lot of things over the years, and it was a real pleasure to have him aboard for DeerCast Track.
So, Tracker John, give us a little bit of your backstory, how you got into this. I mean, because it's a whole different world. I mean, it's a real talent that you have to work on and continue to try to nurture and figure out exactly how to train your dogs and how many different dogs you need to have on, you know, at the ready. So give us a little bit of your backstory, how you got into it in the beginning.
Well, you know, I've been doing this for close to 40 years, and for quite a while now, full time. I mean, it just doesn't end. But what a lot of people don't realize is that I've actually got a pretty heavy bow hunting background myself. I used to be a hardcore traditional hunter. I used to build my own bows, shot moose, deer, caribou, bears, all with my homemade stuff. So I actually got into the dog tracking thing for my own purposes. And, you know, way back then, I didn't know of anybody else doing it, so I was kind of self-taught, and it just grew over the years. And then as I refined my techniques and started to get good at it, well, naturally, friends know of it, and they want your help, and the next thing you know, it's friends of friends, and then friends of friends of friends, and it just kind of snowballed with the success we were having. So it wasn't something I actually planned for, beyond just being able to take care of my own needs, but it certainly has blown up to something I would have never imagined.
And then all of a sudden you become a hot commodity in the fall in the Midwest.
He's everybody's best friend when they make a bad shot.
Right.
Where's Tracker John?
You know, if there's a lot of hunting going on, there's going to be a need for the service. And try as you might to make a good shot. If you're doing a lot of hunting, sooner or later, something's going to happen. Whether you've made a bad shot, whether the weather conspires against you, the wound itself is just something that's bleeding internally rather than externally, so it's very difficult to run the trail. There's all kinds of things that can happen, and if a lot of things are going on, sooner or later things are going to happen.
So how How long did it take you to, and I'm sure I know how you are, you're a perfectionist, so you probably would say, hey, I still have not perfected it, but how long did it take you to become proficient in your craft?
Um, yeah, I don't know whether there's a direct answer to that. Like you say, it's a matter of levels. The thing that I've come to realize is that to have some success at trailing with the dog is actually pretty easy. Running the easy trails is probably easier than people would think, but it's the tough ones. The tough ones are probably actually more difficult to trail than people would imagine. So it's where on that continuum you want to be. And of course, I'm looking to be that guy where if I show up, your chance of recovery could not be better. So you're right, Matt, that for me, I'm still striving and still trying to get better. And when you're doing it at my level and I've got to have multiple dogs, well, it's hard enough to train one to be at a super high level, but to maintain multiples, then it all of a sudden becomes pretty much a full-time job.
And, that's the thing, as you talk about your dogs, that's the thing that always intrigues me are the conversations we have about each individual dog, their personality on the trail, around the customer, with the deer, all of those things. Take us through what you look for in terms of a serviceable dog that you can put in front of customers in a multitude of situations.
Well, as you're alluding to, every dog is an individual, just the same as people are individuals. So how one thinks and works is going to be different than another. So as the handler, you've got to understand all that, and you've got to put enough time into the work with the dog so you know how to interpret, handle, and read that particular dog. So a lot comes down to the training. There's just no getting away from it, that it just takes a lot of time with each dog to learn its mannerisms, to be able to read. If you're running a trail that's an easy trail, let's say, it's not hard to read the dog. It's pretty obvious their mannerisms. But when things are difficult and faint and complicated and distorted, then it's a whole different scenario. It's very subtle clues, and it becomes way more difficult to read those subtle clues through the dog's behaviors and body language and mannerisms. And that's all part of all that time you put in behind the dog to be able to do that. Because generally, yes, you're following the dog, and people might think, well, there's Tracker John. All he's got to do is follow the dog, hang on to that tracking line, and you're good to go. Well, there's actually a lot more to it than what the casual observer might see. How I'm interpreting dog in it, and quite subtly, I can influence what the dog is doing. So that's a double-edged sword. Sometimes you can work to your advantage. Sometimes it works against you. So it's all those subtleties that require the time with the individual dog.
So right now, how many dogs do you have that you feel confident to go take a trail or to take, to a client's job? How many dogs do you have on, I guess, on staff, quote unquote staff, where you feel confident, hey, this dog can get it done, and I know they can do the job?
Well, you always got your favorites, and we can look back to my famous dog, Jessie, and all she did, and she literally worked with me for 11 years. So when you've got a dog like that, it's hard not to reach for your big gun when, somebody's trophy of a lifetime is on the line. And that does make it difficult, putting a younger, newer dog into the rotation. but I try in training to cover so many things and have a dog so that I am confident that we can use it on the real thing. Unfortunately, this year I've had a pretty rough year, and last year I was traveling with 4 bloodhounds, and I've actually lost 2 of them to old age and cancer this summer. Presently, my German Shepherd that was my caribou dog in the far north when I did that for 20 years. My last caribou dog, Elle, she's in her final days, so I'm experiencing a lot of loss this year, so that's pretty heartbreaking. So presently, I've got Janie. She's, I guess you'd call my big gun right now and doing the majority of the work, and near and dear to the Drurys, I think, is my little rising star Willa, who's done some great work for me this year. So presently, I'm running the 2 of them, toying with the idea of getting a third, just because I've got to cover my bases, sometimes you just tire a dog out, and just the dog's no different than a person. If you're tired and beat up, maybe you're not going to be doing your best work. So I got to be able to rotate another dog in. Heaven forbid somebody gets sick or injured during the season, then that dog might be out of the rotation, and then you got to have another 1 or 2 to back up with. Fortunately, this season, knock on wood, it looks like we made it through the season without any injuries or anything like that. So I'm happy to say we've Janie and Willa and myself survived another season.
That's the interesting thing is we've worked with you, as Mark alluded to, for over a decade now, and we see you, unfortunately, probably for you and us, we see you at least a couple times a year between all the different groups that we have out there, and that's always the fun part for me, is to get to sit and listen to your stories, usually after we have a successful track job, and get to hear some of the crazy tales of the trail for you and where all you've had to go. Or I remember a story you told about a deer pinning, was it Jesse down one time, and like the craziness that can
Jesse
happen on the trail.
Me.
Was it you? Yeah.
Well, Jesse first, and when I tried to prevent her from being killed, then the deer quickly turned on me and had me pinned down. Was trying to gore me, and that's happened actually a couple of times. Trail enough wounded stuff, sooner or later something's coming back at you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in that scenario, what's going through your mind? Obviously, you see your dog, and if your dog's pinned down, I mean, that's your child, right? I mean, that's how you feel about these animals. I'm sure it's pretty nerve-wracking when you see something like that take place.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's true. I don't have children. They are my children. My animals are my children. Not only that, but they're my livelihood. That's it's what I'm doing now. So, and my dogs aren't kennel dogs. My dogs are living inside with me. So they are very much a part of my family. They are my family. So yeah, that's a bad situation when something like that happens, but there's other dangers on the trail, going off an embankment or a cliff, or just getting hurt in any kind of number of ways. So there's always things that can go on. Janie actually had 2 rough seasons where she basically was out the entire 2 seasons. Not last year, the season before that, and the season before that. One time she got tangled up with a big 12 pointer, and she ended up getting some severe infection from that encounter, and I thought she was dying. As she was close to that, she went into surgery for that one and took several months to recover from that. The season before that, she was also out of commission from a tick-borne illness. Really rough shape. I thought she was dying from that. So we've, it's there's some bad sides to all this too. And as I always say, things go in streaks sometimes. So you run into these rough spots, and hopefully that rough spot's done, and now we're going to be on clear sailing for a while. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. How many days a year do you practice? You know, I know when you get into the season, it's go time. But starting about now through the start of the season, how often do you practice with each individual dog? You have two currently, Willa and Janie. How often will you run each? I would assume Willa would perhaps get the most practice because she's younger, or perhaps not. I don't know.
No, Willa is definitely the focus now. When we get done with this podcast, I've got a practice trail out. I'm going to be running it. So for me, it literally doesn't end. It's year round, and it's pretty much every day. Trailing a lot, if not every day, a lot. And the dogs have got to be exercised. These are high energy working dogs. A lot of people have misconception about a bloodhound. They've seen too much Beverly Hillbillies or something like that, where the old bloodhound is laying about on the porch and barely moving. And that's not the case. I would call them at least medium energy, if not high energy dogs. Willa's pretty much off the charts 24/7. So if you're not doing something with these dogs, you got trouble. I always like to say a tired dog is a good dog. So it's surprising. Running trails is very tiring for the dogs, and I don't necessarily mean in a physical sense, because it's not physical so much. An easy trail, you could pretty much run all day and doesn't tire the dog out. But those ones, they've really got to concentrate and sniff and work for every inch, fight for every inch. Those are mentally exhausting for the dog. So what I'll see is if I run a practice trail with a dog, the rest of the day is a lot easier to manage with them. If they're not doing anything, if I don't exercise them, I mountain bike with them, snowshoe in the wintertime. We're always doing something. So they're getting yesterday, I think we did about 5 miles. So you got to burn that energy off. And Willa, especially, because she is a puppy, a big puppy, she's all excited, and everything in the world is fun and new and exciting. And you got to burn some of that off to get her to focus down and really fight for it.
When you put out these practice trails, what exactly are you doing? What are you putting out exactly for them to run these practice trails in the off season?
For the most part, you're putting out blood trails. I save blood from deer that are recovered. I've got a small outfitter that I do their work, and they're very good about saving me blood when they gut their deer and put it in the freezer. In fact, I just picked it up from them yesterday. So that gets bottled and put in the freezer, and that's primarily the scent that I'm using. My dogs are trained to blood scent and the scent of wounded game, and that's what we're focusing on, and that's what I use in training.
So are you dripping it? Are you spraying it? Or take us through a practice trail, one that you want to be a little tough on them?
Well, if you want it to be tough, I mean, you use minute amounts of blood. And so with a puppy, you're putting out obvious stuff that the main thing above all with the dog, it needs to be reliable and specific to the blood scent. That probably is the biggest requirement the dog has to have, is absolute reliability to the scent that you're searching for. If you've got that, you've got 75% of the ball game, is because a lot of times when we're running blood trails, there's nothing visual to see. Now, just because it's not visual for a human to see doesn't mean that it's not there for the dog to pick up. I mean, just molecules of scent that have drifted down. There's nothing to see, but it's there for the dog, and the dog's got to be reliable to that. And as I said earlier, if things are obvious, it's a really lethal shot, and that deer is just smelling dead deer walking to the dog, well, then it's pretty easy to read the dog and to have confidence. But if there's nothing to see and it's faint and the dog is really having to work for it and it's maybe not a real clean line, well, then you better have confidence in your dog that it's 100% reliable or nearly so that you can keep going without any visual evidence. And when the dog is, not totally locked on, fish on, just blasting it out, but having to work for it and circling, and then maybe the deer has done maneuvers. So to get all through that, you need reliability. That's the main thing.
I have a couple questions here on this topic. So, one of the things that I've learned through time here when we're tracking with you, we always stay back and try not to, even when we first, kind of go through all efforts to find the deer on our own before we call you. You're always telling us to be careful about where we're putting our own scent, trying not to mess up the trail, basically, right? So when you set out your test trails for your dogs, what do you do for your own scent control? Like, do you have to be careful of your boots having smell, or you know what I mean? Are you trying to be as scent free as possible so that they don't latch on to your scent at all, or they're only latching on to a blood scent?
One of the reasons I am train my dog specific to blood is because blood is a long-lasting scent, more so than a track scent or some of these other things you might have to deal with or be able to train your dog to focus on. So when I'm running practice trails, I'm not too concerned about my scent, and there's other ways you can proof against that. Cross trails, different things that you set up in the practice trail to train against those things. And you just have to be inventive in your training, and I'm fairly confident I can train against pretty much anything that I'm going to encounter on the trail.
So do you utilize GPS or when you're setting out these test trails? So because I know you'll leave some for a day or two, to make it harder and harder, you've left some out, right? For a few days. Do you leave GPS kind of coordinates as to where you had put spots of blood, or how do you go about that process?
No, the only thing I mark is the start of the trail with a flag and the end of the trail with a flag. And pretty much if I need to or want to, I can, I more or less remember where I went when I put the trail out, and I can target specific landmarks if I really want to, be accurate about, okay, go from that big pine tree over across the field to that apple tree, that kind of thing. But a lot of times when I practice trailing, to make it more realistic and getting back to the trust issue, I try to go places that I haven't been in a long time or when it's thick, and I purposely don't pay attention to the trails I'm laying, so that when I do go back and run it with the dog, it's more like the natural experience of following a deer where you don't know where the deer has gone, and to make it more realistic.
It's pretty interesting. So, before we go too much further, we got a pretty good question of the day today. So I want to get into that and try to help answer this gentleman's question that he had. So the question of the day is brought to you by Sportsman's Channel, the new home of Winchester and Drury's Natural Born and your destination for everything red, wild, and blue.
Hi, my name is Steven. I'm from Pennsylvania. I have a question about tracking dogs. How well can a tracking dog blood trail a deer in wet conditions, or after a rain, or after it's been raining or misting for several hours? I had an occasion this summer or the past fall where I hit a buck a little far back and it rained the rest of the day, and we elected to do a grid search instead of get a tracking dog out because we figured it'd be too wet for a tracking dog. I'm wondering if that was a mistake, not at least attempting to get a tracking dog out. So thanks for your help.
Great question, Stephen. And this is something that I'm sure you probably run into quite often. Weather, I would think, would be one of the biggest factors in how quickly you need to go in after a whitetail. So, Tracker John, take us through your thought process here.
Okay, well, that is a good question, and actually a common misconception. I hear that a lot. People assume that after it's rained, it's going to be difficult or impossible for the dog to be able to trail, and that is simply not the case. People are viewing it from their own perspective, which is visual, whereas for the dog, it's obviously scent related. So the analogy I would give is consider those scent molecules, the blood scent molecules, to be particles, dust particles. And let's say that you could actually see them, but they're so minute you could barely see them. Well, if you sprinkle that across a lawn or some grass, and you could barely still see it visually, but then it rains, well, it washes it all down off the blades of grass, down into the dirt. You can no longer visually see it, but it's still there and the dog can scent it. So actually, rain, I've tracked through some pretty heavy rain and it hasn't made a difference. Rain doesn't really worry me as far as the dog scenting. What it does do, obviously, is it removes the visual for the humans involved, including myself. And it's always nice when you're doing a trail to have a little visual confirmation at some point. On an easy trail, on a dead deer walking trail where the dog's really locked on and it's obvious, doesn't make any difference. But on those complex trails, the faint trails, maybe the deer is marginally wounded, then it sure is nice to have that little bit of confirmation. But as far as Steve goes, yeah, that probably was a tactical error. Blind searching to me is always the method of last resort, and when that's all you've got, and that goes for me too. I mean, trailing is where it's at. If the dog can take you exactly where the deer went, that obviously is way superior than even doing an area search with my dog where you're just trying to cover a lot of ground and hit the scent of the carcass, because you may be looking in the totally wrong direction. You could be miles away from where the target actually is. So trailing is always the superior method. And so long story short, yep, I wouldn't hesitate to attempt a trail that's been rained upon.
Good answer. Appreciate that, John. I've got a quick question for you, and I think we've talked about this before. Why always females? All of your dogs that I've met and trailed with have always been female.
Well, one of the big reasons is size. As you know, my dogs aren't little. My females tend to be about 90, 95 pounds, and that's lean pounds, muscular pounds. If I wanted to fatten them up a little bit, I could probably put another 10, 15 pounds on them. But males, can be another 20, 30 pounds on top of what a standard female weighs. So I sure as heck don't need that dragging me through the bushes, although the guides and some of these young guys love it when I'm getting ripped through the briars, and they think it's fun. But I don't need any more of that than necessary. And then once I've got a couple females, how do I put a male into the mix? Somebody's in heat, and how's that going to work through the season? You know, I'm living, we're all clustered together in a little tracker shack, or riding to trails all in the truck together. So it would be impossible to separate somebody from the males if they're in heat or whatever. So I'm locked into females.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does. Is there a demeanor difference outside of the size? Do you prefer working with the females, or is there an intelligence difference, or would males do just as well outside of just the size and the heat issue?
Well, that's a subject for debate, and perhaps one I'm not totally qualified to comment on because I haven't had a bunch of males. You could make the argument that males are better because if you look at a lot of dog field trials and whatnot, it seems to be mostly males that are winning. But is that because people don't get females for the heat issue? They don't want to be out of commission during a dog's heat or something when a field trial could be going on. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. For certain applications, which I'm not involved in, say like police work, where they want a fairly aggressive dog, it can do bite work and whatever else, then it's almost all males and very few females can handle that. There are a few, but it's the exception. But of course, that's not what we're doing. And the females, they bond to me well. It's a team. So for the other reasons I've already explained, that's where I'm at and that's where I'm staying.
He's all in.
He's a ladies' man.
I have no choice.
Well, I think this has been a great podcast, but I want to save some of our discussion for another time and another podcast. So
absolutely.
Unless you have anything else to add, Mark or Tracker John, you have anything else to add for our question of the day, I think we're going to wrap this one up and start a new one here shortly.
Absolutely. We appreciate you very much, Tracker John. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure all these years.
Absolutely.
And we're not done.
No, we're not.
Terry isn't getting any younger, though.
Nor is Tracker John.
Hey, who are you looking at?
All right. Well, for this edition of the 100% Wild podcast, we want to say thank you, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace out. We're adding new videos every week, so make sure to click that subscribe button and check out all of our amazing content. This episode of DoD TV is brought to you by OnX Hunt, the nation's #1 GPS hunting app.